Welcome to Real Money, Real Experts, a podcast where leading financial counseling and coaching experts share their stories, their challenges, and their advice for helping people manage money in the real world. I'm your host, Rachael de Leon, Executive Director of the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, or AFCPE.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Mary Bell Carlson, an accredited financial counselor, or AFC, and the president of Financial Behavior Keynote Group. Every episode, we're taking a deep dive in the topics that personal finance professionals care about, helping clients, building community, and your professional growth. Daniel Crosby is the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion Advisor Tech. In his role, he is responsible for bringing behavioral tools, training, and technology to financial advisors to allow for the practical application of behavioral science. He's a psychologist by training and a behavioral finance expert who applies his study of market psychology to everything from financial production design to advisor-client engagement. Dan has more than 10 years of experience in the financial services industry and has published a number of best-selling books that serve as guides to building stronger advisor-client engagement with a focus on achieving better outcomes. Dan, we're glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So Daniel, one of our favorite ways to kick off every interview is to have you take us back. Can you tell us a little bit how you got into this field?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I took the long way. I took the sort of the circuitous route. So as Mary said, I'm a clinical psychologist by education, and I really went into the business specifically with an eye to thinking that I would work with women with eating disorders. I mean, that was sort of my stated reason for going into the industry. And I got in and I got a couple of years into clinical work and I really just burned out. It was incredible work, powerful work. I'm glad I did it. And I think it's such important work, but I was young, I had poor boundaries, and I feel like I just took my work home with me to a degree that was untenable. And so I came to my dad about 3 years into my PhD program, and I said, Dad, look, I love studying about why people do the things that they do, but I don't know that I need to do it in a medical setting. And my dad, who's a financial advisor, said, well, hey, there's a ton of psychology in my work. And, at the time I was like, what are you talking about? Because I had always really sort of conceptualized of my dad as a salesperson and sort of a stock picker. Sort of my one-dimensional view of his role was as someone who selected investments and someone who brought in new assets. And I was like, what does your work have to do with psychology? And so my dad didn't have the language to say, hey, you should look into behavioral economics or you should look into behavioral finance. He didn't know what any of those things were. But sort of that simple comment on his part put me on a path to discover these things myself and then to try and create solutions that speak to people like my dad, who's, a financial advisor in a mid-sized city in the South. I felt like there was a ton of great work being done in academia, and I felt there was a ton of need for folks like my dad, but there wasn't sort of a translator or a go-between for those groups, and that's who I've tried to be.
Dan, I remember meeting you almost a decade ago when you were doing many shows and keynote events. Kind of tell us what that looked like. So you found out from your dad, I really like this space. What did that transition into the space look like for you?
So I first had to sort of get someone to take me seriously at all, like sort of in a business context. And that was really, that took a minute, it's like, so I wanted to do this, but after I graduated with my PhD, I was still applying and everyone's like, you're a clinician. And I couldn't sort of get anyone to take a chance on me until I had one gentleman who was himself a clinician and had transitioned into sort of organizational behavior type work. He knew that it was possible, and so he took a chance on me, and I'm of course forever grateful for the chance that he took on me and what he saw in me. And my first work out of grad school was actually doing pre-employment assessments and sort of consulting at a bank. So our number one client was a large bank here in the Southeast that, lots of folks would know. And before they would hire someone, they would bring me in to give them IQ tests, personality tests, sort of culture fit assessments, and do a half-day interview with them. And in addition to that, I was doing some consulting and some training and some speaking around, we'll call it sort of high-level behavioral economic principles. And I did that for about a year and a half. And I was, at some point I was like, I was like 27 when I started this job. I saw what I was billing my clients and I saw what I was getting paid and noticed the large discrepancy. And so I said, look, I think I can do this on my own. So in the middle of the Great Recession, I decided to go out on my own in my late 20s and sort of hang a shingle doing sort of behavioral finance consulting on my own. And so, I can go into that in some detail, but it just started slowly and really spread sort of organically through word of mouth, just getting one or two organizations to take me seriously. And the uptake, the belief in the behavioral side of the business, I can't overstate this. It just wasn't then what it is now. It's so widely accepted now. And, 12, 13 years ago when I was starting out, it was just not that way. You kind of had to convince people that this thing even existed and then convince them to hire you. So yeah, it was tough at first, but I made it.
Well, I'm smiling, Dan, because you and I are in that same realm. And I know that I remember one speaker telling me that he had a video about 5 or 7 years ago that was a great TED Talk, super strong. And then nobody even knocked on his door. No one was watching it. And here you think of a TED Talk to have great success, right? And it wasn't until the last 2 to 3 years that anyone has even cared. And so I think that very similar, right? Things come in and fade out, but I really am grateful for what I am seeing on this financial behavior change front, the shifting conversation about how we work with human beings and how we need to know the technical side, but the most important asset is understanding humans and how to navigate that territory.
I remember going to a large insurance provider and sort of, giving them my pitch, and they're like, this isn't a thing. Behavioral finance isn't a thing. And I'm like, no, someone won a Nobel Prize for it this year. I promise it's a thing. But, it kind of hadn't trickled down. And, Mary, even this year, you said the last 2 or 3 years, and it's definitely been trending that way for a long time. But even this year, I've just noticed a groundswell and an enthusiasm and a widespread acceptance that I've never seen before.
And it's exciting. I think that's one of the things that for so many of our listeners, and by the way, we have a lot of listeners that are practitioners. And so I think they can really relate to you when you've had these ups and downs and how you've had to sell yourself and you quite honestly have had several roles in this field. And that's kind of what I want to go into next. I want to start off with one of your biggest epic failures. Can you share with us where you just landed flat on your face at one point?
My biggest, probably most epic failure was early in my time as a consultant, early in my time as a solopreneur. And what had allowed me to jump from W-2 employment to self-employment was sort of one big contract, one steady contract. And a couple of years into my consulting life, I lost that contract. I mean, nothing... I wish I had a better story for you. It's nothing catastrophic happened, but just, we parted ways. I lost that contract, and that was 80% of my income. And I was so disheartened, and I was so stuck at the time. But what it allowed me to do, and I think many people who've lived through something similar would tell you the same, is that disruption, that change, that failure made me revisit a bunch of things that I had gotten lazy about. I had sort of rested on my laurels because I had this big client, and I had, not been charging enough, and I had not diversified enough, and I had not thought about the future enough. And so that, it's trite to say, right? Because at the time I was terrified and I had, young kids and no money. But, that really was the catalyst for all the good stuff that's come afterwards, for all the books, for all the success, for all the other stuff, was really catalyzed by that sort of moment of having to self-examine and go you're not going to be able to feed your family, bud, if you don't, if you don't tighten this up. And so, it's one of those creative destruction moments that you're not thankful for at the time, but you certainly are, 10 years later.
Yeah. And I think that's the part that so many of our listeners can relate to is learning from epic failures, because we've all had them, nothing to be ashamed of, but they really can be a launch point for something else. So now I want to follow up with, tell us about what one of your biggest successes has been.
This is always the harder part to talk about, right? But the thing that I'm proudest of professionally, I'll put it that way because it seems less obnoxious. Like the thing that I'm proudest of professionally are my books. So, in particular, my books, The Behavioral Investor and The Laws of Wealth, both of them were named Best Investment Book of the Year in the year that they came out. They've each been translated into a number of languages, I think 12 languages now. And like the success of those books and just the idea that my ideas can sit on someone's nightstand in Malaysia. I had a buddy on vacation in Malaysia recently, and he's like, hey, took a picture, saw my book in a bookstore. And that to me is by far the coolest thing that I've ever done, is just getting ideas out into the world in a way that's permanent, and letting those ideas travel around the world is such a gift and such a cool thing to me that's definitely what I consider my biggest success.
Yeah, and I want to dig in a little more to that because I know we'll have lots of listeners that either have written a book or want to write a book. But let's talk about the hard parts of that too, because it's not necessarily an overnight success. What has it been like in your journey as an author?
Oh, I have a great story for you. So I am under contract. I've not told anyone this, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing. So I'm under contract it's March 29th now. I'm under contract to deliver a new book on September 1st. And the way that I had been doing that is I do kind of all the research up front. It's like I outline it meticulously, because you got to eat that elephant one bite at a time, right? So it's like, okay, if a book's 200 pages long, I'm going to break it into 50 chunks. And then you're just writing a bunch of 4-page essays. And that's sort of infinitely more doable to me than the alternative. So I'd broken it up into all these chunks. And this is right as Chat GPT is hitting. And so I am playing around with Chat GPT. And so let's say I'm writing about financial wellness. Well, I can go to Chat GPT and type in, okay, give me the 10 most popular or most cited works, academic works on financial wellness. Give me a title, a brief summary, and a link to a PDF or a link to a journal. And Chat GPT would spit it back. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the easiest book I've ever written. Like, this is going to do, you still got to write the thing, but like, this is going to tee up such an incredible amount of research for me. I'm going to be able to know at a glance whether I want to dive deeper and read the whole study, on and on. Okay, I've got about 80 pages of notes now. I go in yesterday and start clicking on the links. They're all made up.
Oh my goodness.
It's nonsense. And I start Googling the name of these studies. They don't exist.
Oh my goodness.
So when you ask me about the hardest part of writing a book, the hardest part of writing a book is right now, when you think you're being technologically savvy and bold and using a great new tool, and it's just aggregating nonsense and making up studies. So that's my hardest thing at this moment in time, Mary.
Daniel, that's a good lesson because you hear a lot of buzz around that tool and that upcoming technology, and even the fear of, in academia of people using that, or it even taking away the need for authors because everything can be written through a bot. But it's for better or for worse. That's a good reminder that I think there is value in technology, but there needs to be a balance between the professional and the tech.
I was weirdly relieved, to kind of to your point, immediately I was dejected. I have a ton
of work to do.
Ton of work to do now. But yeah, there was something comforting in knowing, like, okay, I still got to put some elbow grease into this, and like, this isn't going to right itself. And I still need to do some work here, for better or worse.
That's a fair warning to any college students out there, by the way. That if you think
Yes.
it's going to write your paper, be warned.
Better click those links.
Yeah, God forbid your professor looks up any of the studies. I saw, when this happened to me, I started digging around, and there was a YouTube video by an Oxford professor who's like, yeah, I got this paper from a student, and they had this fascinating article, and I was shocked that I had never read the study, and I went and looked it up, and it did not exist. Yeah.
Well, Mary had mentioned that a lot of our listeners work in the personal finance space, and anywhere from financial planners to counselors to educators. And your interest in behavioral finance started with your father, who is a financial planner. But if you had a piece of advice to give to some of our listeners, maybe they're struggling to build stronger engagement with clients, what would you say to them?
This is tough, and it's a little amorphous, but I do think it's the most important thing, so I'll say it. So I believe that our clients have a sixth sense for authenticity. And when I think back on the most valuable elements of my doctoral training, which candidly I don't use much of, sort of in my day to day, the most valuable piece of that experience for me is what I'll call doing my own work, right? Like the process of having had a therapist, the process of getting brutal feedback from my cohort and people I was close to about my performance as a therapist. And so I think for folks that are having a hard time connecting, I think we need to do what Jason Zweig has written about, which is to use financial psychology and sort of human first advice and all the things we're talking about as a mirror first, a mirror onto our own behavior first, and then only secondarily as something we use to help our clients. Because I think when we are in a good place, when we are non-defensive, when we are authentic and open, and all the things that we preach to our clients, I think it becomes second nature for them to meet us where they're at. So I think sometimes that lack of success is not some lack of technical chops or not a need to take a class on active listening. It's barriers that exist because we haven't done the hard work of sort of weeding our own garden yet.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you said doing my own work in the same line that you just mentioned the Chat GPT, right? Like, because it really is about looking internal. It's so easy to see someone else's bias, a cognitive bias, but it's very hard to see our own. And it's very hard to change that. And I think that's what's, as financial coaches and counselors, it's very easy to tell people what they should do, but it's really hard to look internally and see what we need to be doing and how we can be better listeners or better involved in our own lives and with our own spouses or with our own families. So, Dan, I want to go back to our technology discussion because I think there's a lot there and there's a lot of questions in the financial advisor community about how technology is going to drive our future. I know that a few years ago, we were really worried about AI completely taking over a financial planning job. We haven't seen that. We have seen it help maybe in certain components, and you work in a technology space. Talk to us. How do you envision technology affecting or driving financial services in the future?
I was on a panel recently with Brian McLaughlin, the founder of Redtail, and we were talking about AI because Redtail uses AI. And, even though we work for the same company now, they kind of positioned us as sort of this man versus machine back and forth. And Brian is my buddy, so he was giving me a hard time. But, the way that I put it is that we want to use AI to help build a practice around us and not have us build a practice around AI. Because I don't think, as was said earlier, I don't think we need to be scared of any of these things, because I think the least valuable parts of the sort of planning coaching process are increasingly automated. And I think that's nothing but a good thing. The fact that investment management, rebalancing, trading, planning, all of these things are going to continue to see greater and greater technological strides. I think that's a really good thing because it allows us to be free to do the things that are uniquely human. Because, the fact is there's 330,000 financial advisors in the US, and all of them, nobody likes to say this out loud, but all of them do kind of the same stuff. Like, if you take away sort of like the, 1 to 5% who don't do a very good job, the 95% plus are doing the same stuff. They're creating plans, they're diversifying assets, they're doing all the blocking and tackling, and AI is going to make that easier and better and more streamlined. The most unique thing about your business is you, and you're going to get to be more you as AI and technology continue to make things better and easier. And I think the people who have done their work, right, that done the thing that we've talked about and have built a human-first, client-centric business are going to really stand out. And then the people who are trying to compete on today's hot technology, today's hot technology is tomorrow's table stakes. And you see how fast Chat GPT is improving. Look, if I give it another couple weeks, it'll probably give me some good citations. Maybe I should, maybe I just need to wait a month. So I think it's good to be aware of these things, to stay abreast of new developments, but I don't think it makes sense to try and have this be your competitive advantage, because you are the best and most unique part about your business, and let AI help you be more of who you are.
Daniel, you are incredibly well-read and well-connected in this space. What are some of the top books that you'd recommend our listeners to read to become better versed in financial behavior?
Okay, let's see. I've got a whole list that breaks it out by sort of subdiscipline, and of course I'm going to blank now. So the best books I've read this year, the Brad Klontz book that just came out, I'm going to forget the title of it, something very formal. But the Brad Klontz book, yeah, the Brad Klontz book that just came out, I just finished, and it was really fantastic. And he has a co-author whose name I'm forgetting. Anyway, I'm messing that one up, but it was very good. And there's a couple of books by someone who I am on the same publishing label with, the Choice Factory and The Illusion of Choice by Richard Shotton are both very, very good. I just finished those. Those are both fantastic. And there's a new podcast I would recommend too. Gotta recommend my podcast, Standard Deviations, which I, talk about this stuff every week on Standard Deviations. But this morning I interviewed a woman called Jen Kleinhens, who has a podcast called Choice Hacking, which is like 10 to 15 minutes long and covers consumer psychology and behavioral economics in a really engaging and approachable way. And it's just a great listen.
Awesome. And by the way, it's Charles Chafin, Ted Klontz, and Brad Klontz, and it's the Psychology of Financial Planning. At the end of each interview, we like to ask our guests to share their 2 cents. If you had one piece of advice to leave with our listeners, what would it be?
Yeah, the piece of advice is that none of this matters very much. I think sometimes we who work in the field of finance get so wrapped up in money and money stories that we forget the very thing that we should be remembering and sharing with our clients is that all that money is good for is to serve the creation of a meaningful life. And so, my dad, who is my financial advisor, whenever I call him to talk about my money, the first thing that he asks me is, are you putting first things first? Which is effectively like, are you working for family and faith and the things that matter more than this money thing that we're about to talk about? So I think it can become easy for us, for money to loom larger in our minds than it ought to. So yeah, my advice is just remember how silly all of this is, and that, none of us makes it out of here alive, and that all of this is to just help us live a good, meaningful life with the short bit of time we have here.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Can you tell our listeners how and where they can connect with you?
Yeah, Daniel Crosby, PhD on LinkedIn, Daniel Crosby on Twitter. The books are The Laws of Wealth and The Behavioral Investor. And my podcast is called Standard Deviations.
Dan, it's always a joy to chat with you and have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Rachel, it's always fun talking with Dan. He's always doing something and starting something new. And I've known his work for a decade now, and it's fun to see how he's involved. I'm actually liked hearing about his background. I don't know that I've ever got it in one sitting of how everything evolved. And so I thought that was very neat. Some of the key points that I thought he honed in is authenticity. And I appreciate that we got an authentic side of him today. And I think that's really important as you're working with clients is your own authenticity, to where the client feels better and can actually communicate better with you. And it's one of the ways to best improve relationships is by being authentic, and you'll find like-minded clients that really just come to you because of that authenticity. The other way he put it is the most unique thing about you is you. And so with that, keeping in mind, I've heard a lot of financial service professionals nervous about technology or trying to stay away from technology. And I think that's just the opposite of what you want to do, is understand technology will always be there. It will always be evolving. But at the end of the day, you make up the business. And without you, it wouldn't be the same. And so that's an important key feature. And then last but not least is what his dad said is, are you putting first things first? And I think that's a great way to look back on your own life and say, am I putting my family first? Am I putting my life first? Am I putting myself first, right? Easy to say as maybe as a working mom or as a full-time or multiple jobs, especially if you're launching your own practice. It's hard to put yourself in there or your family in there. But I think that's really, really important as you're doing these things and building out your own business or helping others. As counselors, he even mentioned this on the podcast earlier, is you can burn out, right? And so those types of things are really important if you're helping other people to make sure you're doing self-care and taking care of you too.
Mary, I think that when he spoke about technology, it was really interesting because I think sometimes we see technology, it can be a gift or something to fear, but I love his outlook on technology and how more automation actually allows us to be free to do the things that make us uniquely human and that make us better financial counselors, educators, coaches. And I also really resonated with what he said about money being a tool to serve the goal of living a meaningful life. And it really reminded me of something Sandra Davis always says, that there are no money goals, there are just life goals, and money is just a tool to help us get there. And so just such a delight to have him on today. He was very authentic. And I really appreciated, Mary, the question you asked about the epic failure. I was like, that could be a question on every show, because I really think it opens people up to show authenticity. We've all had epic failures. And I loved how obviously in the moment, you can't always see the other side, but sometimes it's those failures that really move us to where we need to be.
Rachel, that's the one thing I would love to have more authenticity in, is being okay to fail and allowing people the space and energy that even the word failure, I think, makes people nervous. So it hinders our progress. It hinders our ability to push the envelope or move forward in a profession, even in what we do globally, right, as counselors. And so I would encourage you to try things. And it's okay if you fail, because it's going to launch you and you're going to learn something in new ways. And maybe it really is an epic failure that you feel like you learned nothing. It'll still teach you a lesson of what not to do next time and better prepare. So I think that's a really important key to authenticity in the workplace, is talking more about failures.
Mary, I think it also shows the power of language. You hear the word failure and you kind of seize up, but really, it's how do we reframe it in terms of what's the opportunity and what's the learning from it. To everyone listening today, just a reminder to save the date. The AFCPE Symposium is going to be held this year in New Orleans, Louisiana, November 29th through December 1st. And right now we have an invitation to present open, and we encourage anyone who is in research or practice to apply to present this November and join us in New Orleans for the 2023 AFCPE Symposium.